Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let me kind of give you an overview of what our lessons look like. So, we were reading the book Night together. I would read about 10, 12 minutes to Noah, and he was really into it. He basically was like sitting right here, following along, which was great. And I chose that book, number one, for his book, because I knew it was on his summer reading list. I thought that was great. And plus I knew that he had a vested interest in history, because he was always talking to me about history throughout the school year, so I thought that would help. But after we did a read aloud, we would do these things called book chats, where basically we would spin a spinner, and he'd have to answer questions about the book. And sometimes these kind of threw him for a loop, like he wasn't always sure how to get his words out. But for the most part, he did really well, and it was good because it's all about making a connection to the reading. Because I don't want him to just read and it's great, he's fairly fluent, he reads aloud pretty well, but I wanted to make sure he was comprehending what we were doing. And so that's where these came in. So if it ever comes to a point where you're like, hey, I want to see if he knows what's going on, I would just Google book chat or reader's response, and that's where this comes in. And I didn't want to do anything writing intensive when it came to this part, because I just wanted him to talk, because I think he needs a lot of time to verbalize his thinking, because sometimes he'd go, I don't know, but then he would I could kind of see the gears turning, and you can pen? Yeah. I would kind of see the gears turning, and then he would say, I don't know, but then he'd go, well, but yeah, it's kind of and I'm like, exactly. So just giving him time, and that's something that is not always in the classroom, is the time. But I thought this did really well. So we did these every single time we read. So we read and we talked about it. So that was that. And like I said, he really warmed. By the end of it, he knew the routine, and he really warmed up to it.
Okay.
So that was good. After that, we did this thing called a word study, which really he did great on. It was just, we worked on irregular plural sounds, or plurals, root words, and L-E-E-L endings. And he got into it because they were games. And so the first one was a matching game, and you could tell at first he was like, what are you doing? This is kind of, I could tell he thought, well, this is kind of babyish, but then he got into it because he was like, oh, I don't remember where, oh, I think I remember. And so, but what was great was that I gave him the word, and then he had to find the plural, so goose. So the plural was geese, so an irregular. So he liked that, and this was one of the last ones we did, where I gave him the root word photo, and he had to come up with as many words as he could think of. And I chose photo because I know he's very science driven, and so he was coming up with ones I was like, I've never even heard of that word before. So that's what we did. We spent about 10 minutes on word study, and then we would do reading comprehension. So what I did was this technique called tagging, where it's the same thing. It's working on making a connection to the text. So I would take a part of the story that we had read, something from the read aloud, and I printed it off, and then I gave him tags. We talked about Facebook, and he's like, oh, I don't even have a Facebook. He's like, I think I'm one of the only kids that doesn't have a Facebook. I was like, you're fine, you don't need one.
Okay.
But we talked about when you tag something, it's you make it seem important. So here we had several tags, I was shocked to find, I didn't understand why this was happening, was unbelievable, I wonder. So every time we read, I kind of had these ready-made for him, but I asked him to read through first, and he did pretty good. He tends to kind of when he's reading, kind of trail off. So you really want to, I was like, okay, what's happening here? I think he knows the words, but he doesn't go too fast. But I just noticed that sometimes he's just, by the time he gets to the end of a sentence, he's done, and then he starts all over again, and then he's done. But he seemed to like this too, because we could move the Post-it notes around, and so he would put them into parts where different things popped out at him. And the reason why I chose this is because he's going to be doing a lot of cold reads, throughout the school year. They're going to give him a passage and say, answer questions about it. And sometimes what happens is they can't make a connection to the text. And so there's no buy-in. So I thought maybe by showing him some of these, just to keep these are things that maybe he may be thinking about while he's reading, he can kind of start making notes.
And I can find these online as well.
Yeah, it's called, it's my professor actually wrote the article, but it's just tagging for metacognition.
Okay.
Big fancy word. Yeah, it's a big word in education. But it was funny when we did this the third, because each week we worked on a different, like sometimes they were like realizations, sometimes they were wonders, sometimes it was just predictions. Well, the last time we met, he'd already read the book, right? But he was able to go back and tell me, well, hey, I thought they were going to the gas chamber, but really this happened. So that was great that he was able to start making those connections. So that was reading comprehension. And then the last thing was the writing extension. And I think I showed you this. I would give him like journal prompts. And so the one thing I love about Noah is he's got like a ready-made answer. Like he's always ready with an answer. That was always great. I was always like amazed. And when it came down to writing, he's not one of those kids that says, I don't know what to write. He writes, but then he kind of stops and goes, I'm done. You know what I mean? So it was always hard to get him to go back. So like this time around, we did the question, we did the journal prompt, we talked about it, and then he had an answer. He's like, you know, because I said, you know, if you had to leave your home today and could only take what you could carry in a backpack, what would you take? Well, he knew I would take a picture of my family, I would take tools. It's like he knew that, but he writes one long sentence. So that's something that was something I saw throughout the school year as well. But if you tell him, okay, now let's go back and let's think about it. How can we go back and make sentences? How can we go back and add detail? He's like a really good pre-writer, which is great because a lot of kids sit there and go, I don't know what to write about. And then they sit there for 10 or 15 minutes.
That's what he does at home.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think when he gets this prompt, usually when you give him the prompt and you talk a little bit about it, it's like you can see the gears growing, you know? If you just say to him, we'll just free write, that's when he may have an issue, is the free write. But if you give him something, I noticed that he'll just go. But then like when we went back, I said, okay, let's look at this. Because I said, it's great that you've got something down on paper, but let's look at what you have. So we did that, and so we said, let's break it up a little bit. I said, look, you didn't have any periods, so we broke them up. And then he was able to take this and break it up into 2 paragraphs. Now, mind you, it's still short paragraphs, but it's still paragraphs, which is great because organization and structure are very important. When he has to take the English 2-star, he'll have to write an essay, a persuasive essay. But paragraphing is going to be important to that. So the last time we met, I gave him another one, but this had multiple questions to it. So, and you could tell he was ready to write, and he was like, okay, let's stop and think about it. So what we did was we numbered the questions, and I kind of made just like a little graphic organizer. I just numbered. I said, okay, what would you write? And this is where I kind of let him pre-write, and then we went back and wrote. So one of the I'll get to that, but I did make a suggestion about having like graphic organizers, which most teachers use anyway. Some students will have it like on their IEPs, but sometimes they don't put it on there because it's kind of like a given. It's kind of like check for understanding. What teacher is not going to check for understanding, So that's kind of what we did every day that we worked together. Let me talk to you a little bit about his levels. We did all these tests, and he said, oh yeah, I've seen some of these before. I'm sure he's seen some of them. The first one, to get his reading level, I gave him these word lists, and I started him off at the 6th grade level. He had to just read the words to me. He only got one wrong there. And then we went to 7, same thing, read them pretty well. I think he kind of messed up on peculiar. 8 is, I would put at his instructional level. He missed 2. But you can see the words like psychology, it's getting kind of harder, or relevance. And then high school is where he made several mistakes. I think some of them might have been reading a little fast, but for the most part, I think it's just common, places to make mistakes. So after this kind of gave me a point to give him his reading levels. So I started off at 8. So I gave him 3 passages to read, 8, 9, 10, and 11, 12. And so he had to basically read the passage and then answer questions. And he does really, his comprehension is pretty good. I feel like he can really retain the information. If I put a slash through it, it means that he missed a word. Heyerdahl, that's a really hard last name to pronounce, so I really didn't think too much about that one. But he was able to answer a pretty good amount of the comprehension questions. So I would put 8 as his independent level. That's where, if he wants to read a book on his own, or if you want to work on fluency with him, I would start it at the 8th grade, and that way he'll be comfortable. Then there's 9, 10, a failure to communicate, got a little bit longer. he tends to like skip over words. That's what I noticed. And it could be reading too fast, but maybe he just needs to kind of, sometimes people, you know, they do this when they read, you know, I mean, I see adults do it. That could be something, because he just tends to skip over them. And so I wonder sometimes if when he's skipping, is he getting all of it? Is he understanding? Because here, same thing, you can see he was able to recall a few, but not as many as the 8. So I would put this 9-10 as his instructional, which is about on par with where he needs to be. And then 11-12 was considerably longer. Same thing, he's missing words, he was kind of adding words. I think he was getting tired. And then he answered several comprehension questions. So I think the comprehension is not an issue. It's just making sure that you're reading and grasping all the words. Making sure, because even though like little words like the or a, after a while though, you miss a chunk of them, you may be losing sight of what's going on. So I put his instructional level, like I said, his independent is 8. Instructional 9-10, and frustrational is 11-12, which I think for a 10th grader going into sophomore year, that's pretty good. It's not too bad, you know. Then we did a motivation survey just to see how he likes to read, you know, how he feels about reading. So we just had to answer questions like, my friends think I am a good reader, an okay reader, you know, just stuff like this. And so this measures like how he feels about academic reading and how he feels about like recreational reading. And he's kind of 50-50. He literally was like halfway. So I think he knows that reading's important, but he doesn't really like to talk about it. Although Jurassic Park, that has been like amazing.
We have a book on hold.
Yeah.
A dinosaur.
Oh, awesome.
Field book.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so I think for him, it's like, let's just find what he likes and go with it, you know? So he, like I said, he felt pretty like 50-50. Like he knows reading's important, but he's not really going to like share with you. So that was at the beginning. So by the end, I saw the difference, you know, because he found that book that he really liked.
Yeah, he is he doesn't sleep well.
Oh, okay.
Just generally, he's just never been.
He's just never been a good sleeper.
When at night he reads.
Oh.
So.
Well, that's good.
So now it's Jurassic Park. And,
yeah.
You know, previously it was something else.
Something else.
So,
yeah, she does the same thing when she can't sleep. She just reads.
Me too.
Yeah. Spelling. We did a spelling test.
Goodness.
Well, you know, but I can read his handwriting.